Hopefully you'll find this next session interesting. We debated for some time about actually what the title of this session would even be, but we wanted to share really as part of this some views of BTR all around the UK. We know that there's real hubs in London and Manchester, but actually from our perspective, we think there's great examples of how BTR really does work in itself and really does benefit communities all around the UK. So hopefully we can share some of that today. We've got a great panel here with us, and I'll let them introduce themselves first up, starting with Guy.
My name is Guy Butler. I work for a company called Glenbrook. We're Manchester-based. Not allowed to talk about Manchester in this session. And we opened our first build-to-rent scheme in September 2015, The Keel, on the waterfront in Liverpool. We didn't really know what we were entering into. And I think we're going to talk about how things have evolved a little bit on that. We've now delivered 4 more schemes in Manchester, and this year we'll be starting on site with 1,800 build-to-rent units across Leeds and Manchester.
I'm Sam Smith. I'm Director of Operations at Dandy Living. We're a co-living BTR operator based primarily in London. We've got our first 2 schemes live this year, with our 3rd due to launch at the end of this year as well. And so I've been in operations for the last 17 years. I was with Dandara Living previously, and been with Dandy now for about 6 to 7 months. So yeah, that's me.
Amanda Rennie. I'm the Operations Director for Moda. We hopefully all know who Moda are, but we have 5 neighbourhoods operational at the moment, soon to be more. We have approximately 24,000 units in the pipeline across multi-platform. So a lot happening at Moda. I'm a very busy lady at the moment.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm Kevin. I'm Operations Director at Platform. So we're a BTR owner, investor and operator. We started out in 2016, and this year we're actually doubling the size of our operational portfolio. Interestingly, all of our sites are actually outside both London and Manchester and spread between England, Wales and Scotland. So a real sort of breadth and depth of different experience. So we're going to kick things off by talking about an element that's maybe less tangible, which is around culture and around actually how culture in the local places and communities can actually really be benefited and enhanced by what we do in actual BTR developments. And I think, Guy, you're going to kick us off on that subject.
Yes, we had planned a presentation, but thought it was probably a bit dry at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to be having a long presentation on culture. So what I was looking at, or what I have looked at, is that our first scheme, The Keel, we focused on location, we focused on facilities, and the scheme focused on quality of the apartments. And as we've gone through every scheme since then, the schemes have changed. Everything's improved. The amount of facilities have improved, the management's improved, quality of the specification of the building has improved. But the one thing really we think is going to change next is the amount of provision or the integration of culture within the schemes, in terms of both in areas that have culture in and around them, but also the provision of spaces within the buildings. People have introduced cinemas in the past in terms of buildings, and they haven't worked particularly well, I don't think, in terms of they're fairly irregular in their use. They go through phases. But I'm talking about spaces to bring the local community into the buildings, cultural spaces. So we have rooms for yoga and spin classes and everything else. But are these spaces used to bring culture into the building, or accommodate people in your building in cultural areas that come and live there because it's affordable and safe, and they're able to share their wares effectively with the people in the building? And one of the case studies that we looked at was Soyo, which is in Leeds, and it's surrounded by a number of cultural uses. The BBC are there, but also there's 2 theatres are there. There's also a music library very close by, and the university are there. And my hypothesis on that was that actually by New York Square, is it there, that the people living there will be slightly different from the average demographic of 21 to 32 and working in the city, and average salaries. They might be from outside of Leeds, they might be coming from London because they are performers or they're artists or musicians. And does the culturing offer in these schemes change the demographic and the enjoyment of the people who live there? And also then, where else is this being done? So I won't bore you with all the case studies, but it was just looking at culture. We've got a scheme in Birmingham where we have, it's not public yet, but we are going to be bringing in quite a unusual cultural use into the scheme, and we think it'll be a point of difference. And I think that probably all comes back to points of difference. How do you attract customers into your building, and what are the points of difference? And is culture going to become a bigger thing that'll slowly not replace the gym, but complement a gym in your building?
Thank you very much, guys. So I think as an extension of that, we can talk about cultural uses, we can talk about basically, bringing different people from the local community in, but we're also, when we were thinking about this session, we're also thinking about actually how do we, put on, a great service for the local community and try and match what we're doing in each community, in each BTR development to what's going on in the local community. We're going to pick up a couple of themes, I think, on both staff and events and service on that. Sam, I don't know, go next on that.
So I think staffing's been a big thing for me over the last 6 months with a new site coming through. So we've got a site in Harrow, which is a borough that has got a cleared sort of demographic. We've got a high Asian population, and what we've seen come through in terms of our tenants is we've attracted quite a clientele of international students as well as young professionals that are from all walks of life. So we've tried to really replicate with the staffing structure to make sure that they are represented within our staffing, to understand the different cultures of the residents. That's fed into our event plans as well. And what you do see between a site that we've got in Wembley to a site in Harrow, which in distance is not that far, there are some vast differences in terms of the demographic of residents, both from age, professions, cultures, and that's all kind of fed into our staffing and how we're planning for our recruitment strategy moving forward. So it plays a big part for us in recruitment.
Cool. And then Amanda at Moda.
Yeah, obviously the discussion today is about regional cities and how we embed ourselves into these cities, and why would we do that? Why would we choose to do that? Why don't we just saturate the cities that we know, bring the returns? But what we are seeing, and certainly we've seen it at Moda, is it starts at it starts at that design stage. It starts with construction a lot of the time as well. We have land, we, for example, had, Leeds, you've mentioned Soyo, but in Leeds we have land that hasn't yet been built on. We had Canvas Yard pop up and do, we had festivals, we had pop-ups, we had lots of engagement with the local community on that land. In Edinburgh, before we started building on that piece of land, we had a community garden that took residents there on our property. And these are things that should start at the beginning, and then, as you said, it will run all the way through your business, because there is a lot of benefit and positivity in going into these cities and not just putting up a beautiful building and putting a big wall around it and saying, well, this is the luxury building in the city. It's about enhancing and really investing in the areas. For our two mobilising sites now, Hove Central and Holland Park in Glasgow, we've put in essence of about 15 million investment into the Section 106 and really properly thought about what does the area need, what do they want, where are we going to put that money, so that there's a real regeneration in some of these cities. But for us, what we've definitely seen is a real benefit in lower cost to construct, more land availability, all these things that before we even get to the residents and the event programmes and all the fun stuff that we do, we're seeing a real advantage to going into these other cities and learning from each demographic that exists there. What works for one city may or may not work for another one, and we have to be flexible enough. And you touched on amenity spaces and making them flexible, not committing all the time. This is what we're going to do, and it's a cookie cut, and we're going to have cinemas in every single building. Well, actually, maybe we won't. Maybe we'll have lounge spaces that can convert into cinemas, or they could be used for something else. And that multi-purpose has definitely served us well in going into the other cities and getting all that data from different communities.
Great, yeah, and I think, look, the platform would totally agree with that. We were talking earlier about actually, often I think, people look at BTR and think, oh yeah, London, Manchester, and particularly for foreign capital, potentially they're the cities they're looking at there where they think actually we can get the best returns. But actually, and we'll come on to talk about this, from our perspective, actually, similar to you, Amanda, we see that there's actually probably more opportunity in cities and towns that effectively have not much BTR at the moment, right? Yeah, okay, you have to do the education piece even more than you do elsewhere, but actually the chance to reset the rental level, offer a product that people living there have never had a chance basically to actually access. And we see a lot of people, as I'm sure all you guys do, that actually turn up and say, great, look, I have to live here for work, I've been living in this location for a long time, and I've never had access to this kind of accommodation. So I'm willing to spend 500, even more pounds per month more than I currently do, but I've just never had the chance to spend it. I've just never had the chance to access that. And I think we're seeing that in more and more markets as we go around the UK, and then tailoring it, as we say, to the local community means that actually you're probably offering not only the first BTR product, but a product that's much more attributable and relevant to the people that live there. And I think one of the things we were talking about on the cultural point, God, I'm going to expand, is around maybe in other cities there's more of a chance to spend the money effectively because of those returns to bring things in. But actually in other markets it's more important to get down to some of that detail.
Yeah, I think we were talking about how in maybe it's a given more in Manchester and London because the viability perhaps is more enhanced because there's already an established market, your rents are established, the investment yields are all established. Maybe you can have more money to be able to spend on these things because of that enhanced investment proposition. But outside of those areas, we're starting on two very large schemes. We've started on one in Leeds and we're about to start on another one where it's a much more difficult proposition to try and make things stack up. So we forward funded a scheme with L&G and we're about to do another one, in total 1,200 units, and it is very, very difficult to provide all these different uses into the buildings and make it stack up. But we're assisted, ironically, because of various other constraints in terms of location and flooding and not be able to put commercial space at the ground floor. So we can always say, not commercial space, residential space at ground floor. So you end up having spaces because of flooding risks and everything else, and 1 in 100-year flood risks are not common flood risks. But you have space in the buildings, and then it's a case of what do you do with them? And then it's going back to our management team and saying, right, what can we use these spaces for? We're not going to let them for retail. There's no pitch there, and office space wouldn't work. So we start looking at cultural uses and then working with local communities in how can we give space. So it's not very cultural, but we were working with a local canoeing water sports body and trying to do a youth program within the building and using the space. It was free space. It cost a hell of a lot to provide, but it was free space in the building. And it's trying to bring in these other uses so that once the scheme opens, there is some community culture around the buildings that isn't just a transient population coming and going and leaving the building. There's some continuum.
Great, yeah, and I think one example I'd add to that is, and you talk about the use, actually, we were talking about the fact that actually BTR is uniquely placed because we have an interest in the land all the way through to the operational building. So actually, you can do the meanwhile uses like you've done in Leeds. And actually for the scheme in Leeds that we've got coming through, which is 1,350 units, there's actually a pub on the site, right? And actually, it's a bit decrepit. It's like, well, you'd probably knock it down normally. But actually, do you know what? That has real kind of cultural significance to the city of Leeds. It's actually very closely tied to Leeds United Football Club. And even though we don't have any necessarily allegiances to that, actually we think that's a really good part of a neighbourhood that we're going to build. And so we want to keep that. Actually, we want to make it better. We want to restore some of that to its original heritage because there'll probably be a third party running that, but that will be part of that local community and hopefully bringing people in that might have gone to that pub 15 years ago, but actually might come back and understand what's there now and what actually we're bringing to the city. And I don't know, Amanda, whether you want to pick up, one of the things we talked about was why, anyone could do this, right? You could turn up and do a really localised, customised scheme in for sale, for example, but maybe why BTR as well as particular opposition.
And I think, running on from what you just said, we're long-term stewards in this industry, and that's such a unique position that we have because we are investing in the future, whether we like it or not, and whether that's that matches up to everyone's agenda. We are all creating these communities that will only happen a year, 2 years down the line. We fill buildings pretty quick at Moda, but that culture, that community, that real neighbourhood it doesn't come to life until at least 12 months into that because it has to be organic and you need that diversity in the demographic, and you need to really let people settle into how they're going to use the building because they're leading this, and it has to be led by the residents themselves. So the communities also embed around these buildings and they start to interact, and we're very we're very vocal about the fact that we have a lot of public realm, we have a lot of outdoor space, we bring people into our courtyards and our areas around our neighbourhoods. We have pop-up fruit and veg markets that the local community can come and engage with, and lots of other things that we will put on to encourage that interaction. Because what we hear from our residents very clearly is they want to live in a community, a wider community than just the building that we have or the buildings that we have. They want to know the city, they want to engage with the city, with the businesses, with all the opportunities that come up. So I think we are in a very unique position where, yes, we have the ability with our amenity spaces and outdoor spaces and access to people who sometimes are quite influential in bringing people together, but also we're in it for the long term. And that investment that we can just continue to feed and grow with, and all that data that we then get back and think this is what people really are connecting to. And that's probably where we all can do this together as a collective and as an industry, and really see that benefit coming through. And that is very key to the regional cities. I think when you that sense of community, not to have any, and obviously my accent gives me away, I'm from a Scottish city, but when you go to London and Manchester, you don't necessarily feel or see that same level of community or that same engagement with smaller community. And I think that's the real advantage to going into all the different cities within the UK.
Great stuff. So we love cities across the UK. We think BTR works very well. I think there's actually some reasons why you might get better returns and a better sense of community in towns and cities. But obviously, we'd be remiss of us not to mention and talk about and delve into, guess what, operating in different countries, different regions, different cities, different boroughs, has lots of different challenges, right? So I guess who wants to go first on this one around, it's a topic where, it's been discussed in many sessions today and will be for a long, long time. But who wants to pick up first maybe on some of those challenges and things that are being faced in different areas?
I'm happy to take the lead. I suppose if we talk about London, I know we're trying to talk outside of London, but competition is obviously a key one now, especially in certain areas. We've seen that definitely with our Wembley site. We've got stiff competition on the doorstep, so it's offering what is the product that we're offering. The Dandy product is quite unique in the co-living side of things. So we've tried to adapt spaces, so it's not just one thing to be used for. Really try to hone in on what is it residents want living in a co-living development. So, good co-working space, decent Wi-Fi, adaptable rooms that can be used for functions or gyms and that type of thing. And then, if we're looking at our future developments coming through, it's also looking at kind of a home from home feel. So I think obviously with a lot of schemes, you get that sort of hotel, 5-star feel, but now it's trying to move it more to actually feeling homely, so people do feel like they can come down in their slippers and get a cup of coffee and either go and sit in the co-working hub and do their work or go back to their apartment if they want to, but to feel comfortable doing that. So we're kind of thinking of how, incentives that we can do. So to give one is our new site coming up in Brondesbury in Willesden Green, we're actually going to have 2 dogs that are assigned to the site, looked after by the team on the site, looked after by residents, for wellness and that type of thing, and how we can bring pet friendly into co-living as we're kind of making bigger units essentially that would be able to be pet friendly. So there's lots of different ideas that are slightly bit different to BTR on the co-living side, but that's kind of feeding in again and learning kind of from what everyone else is doing. I think that's the sharing of information is key. Yep. And that's what I think is very good about the sector, and it's just kind of sharing what's working, what isn't, and everywhere is different. So.
And I think, I said it earlier when we were talking privately, I said I don't want to be the fun vacuum, and I always am, but I think also we need to, it's right in front of us and we have to address it, the fact that, rent controls, planning, all of these challenges that come up, when we're looking specifically at Scotland, then of course you've got a huge amount of legislation there that has to be considered, but even the rent reform in England and other cities has an impact on whether or not investors are going to really look at these regional cities over the security or the I suppose, supposed security of London and Manchester, where the returns are guaranteed. And I think that's that is our responsibility to face it head on, but also to be vocal about the benefits and understand what restrictions are there, you know, argue when those restrictions do affect our businesses and do something about it collectively, have, you know, one voice to do that, but also to address them and say, yeah, it will cause a challenge, but what do we do about it, and what actions can we collectively bring together?
I think there's lots of those learnings, you know, as we said, you know, the Renters Reform Bill and some of the elements in that, you know, are causing, quite rightly, you know, some concern in England around what does it mean for the BTR model. Obviously, we were talking earlier, you know, in Scotland right now, you know, there is the PRT. It's been there for many years. You know, people can serve, you know, notice at any time, you know, 28 days and be out. You know, there are at the moment, as we know, you know, restrictions around rent increases, but actually BTR is still flourishing. And so, you know, I'm sure we'd all like an easier life and less legislation and things going on, but I think there are certainly learnings from that. You know, we operate in Wales as well, and you need to be registered with Rent Smart Wales and go through that training piece and everything else. But actually, once again, if you know what you're doing, you know, it's a good thing to do. And actually what it creates is a better sector, and a sector which, you know, BTR, if we're delivering the service, we're delivering the community, we're delivering, you know, the amenity and the whole offering, means actually, you know, we can still stand out, and actually we can still have full buildings, we can still, you know, achieve great rents because of what we're doing to differentiate. So I think there's lots of learnings from different cities and the different countries around the UK to take back into England, as actually this stuff can still work. Clearly, we've got the topic of selecting licensing, and there's quite a big session, I think, going on that, so we're not going to try and delve into that right now. But I guess, you know, do we want to kind of circle back round to the investment piece? Because ultimately, that's pretty much why all of us are here, around investment in BTR, making schemes work and the economics around that. Obviously, you touched on that earlier, Amanda, but do you want to sort of share just your views around actually some of the success, you know, in wider cities?
I mean, I think it is just about being more vocal. For me, you know, I'm an operator, so, you know, the investment part's already done by the time I come in. I just get handed it and I just have fun. But I would say that ultimately we do need to be louder, and we do need to share more information around what does work, why, you know, because as I said before, to invest in a regional city, sometimes we have more profit based on the build cost, and, you know, obviously we do everything at Moda, but the build cost is less, the labour can be less. There's lots of different, you know, the operating cost can be less. There's lots of different things that affect that number, and I do think that we shouldn't just focus on this is the way it has to be done because London has shown or Manchester has shown that there's, you know, there's a huge amount of competitors all doing it, and that's just the way to do it. I also think the way we operate needs to be different, and already you're seeing it in some BTR. You know, already in the industry, people are flexing, they are tailoring their businesses more depending on where they are, and that's been something that has come over time, and I think it's really great, and I think a lot of the time it's led by residents themselves and the cities themselves that demand or ask for what they want. And one thing I will say about BTR residents is they're very good at telling you what they want. You know, they don't shy away from giving you that information, sometimes when you don't want to hear it. But yeah, it's really enriching because we can do something with it. But I do think from the investment side, we have to be louder. We have to showcase what is going well in some of these cities. And actually, you can learn a lot that then, you know, you can decide, am I going to go into London? And that's exactly what we've done. We're now going into London, but we've learned a lot from all the other cities that we've gone into first.
It's the perfect storm at the moment on the development investment side because construction prices are out of control. To give you an idea, we built a scheme, our first new build scheme in Manchester at around £130 a square foot build in 2016. It's now £230 a square foot. So rents haven't gone up. Yields have moved out 100 bips probably. Funders won't be touching some of these secondary, tertiary cities. So if you look at Liverpool or Newcastle or somewhere, Nottingham, a lot of funders have entrenched back into Manchester and Birmingham and London. So you've got the perfect storm on that. Affordable housing is coming to the fore. You know, our first few schemes had no affordable at all. We're now delivering 5, 7, 10% affordable houses within our schemes. So we integrate them within the schemes. And that's got a big hit in terms of viability. You've then got, as I said, funding and debt pricing. So it's the perfect storm at the moment. moment, and the fact that anybody can get anything to site is a miracle. So I think there is going to be some really big challenges on the investment side. But one of the things you said about, I think it's easier as a developer to have developed in the regions and then come down to London, which we're looking at London at the moment, than be a developer from London and try and move out to the regions, because you're probably a bit fitter and having to really work your appraisal to be able to come back in the regions. And then when you come to London, you're like, oh my God, you do that. And I think it's probably a good thing. We're looking at sort of West London at the moment, and it's not easy. Of course, it's not easy. And the affordable housing issue is really huge in terms of how you deal with that. But it's a lot easier coming from these other regions outside of Manchester and London and coming into London than I suspect the other way around.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that's a challenge that Dandy are going to see. They've invested heavily within London, especially northwest London, and looking at other cities, it's the rents don't support the product yet. So it's looking at, okay, do we do a slightly different variance, but not coming too far away as to what the heart is of the Dandy product. So I think, primarily London is the key focus for the business for the foreseeable, but wanting to take that product out, but trying to get that investment to stack is really key, and the rents need to move with it before it's going to be viable. So.
Indeed, lots of fun challenges ahead.
Yeah.
One thing we wanted, and we are conscious at the end, we need to give our 3 actions, so we will do that, don't worry. Don't want Brendan suddenly sneaking in and we're not doing that. But one of the things that we talked about, I think, guys, is that we'd quite like to make it a bit more interactive, and we'd quite like to ask any of you guys whether you have any questions. I don't know whether we have a mic at the back. I think we do. So who wants to be brave and ask a question? Thank you very much. Oh.
So, Erin Yahya, Oparo. Guy, you answered my question, so I don't even know if I can ask it. We're looking at a couple of regional cities. We've gone out to the likes of LNG, and what they've come back is, well, this doesn't stack. But we're trying to say that the product that we're creating will stack, but it doesn't exist yet. And so the question is, we haven't been able to make the case because it then goes back, it goes to committee, it goes to the back, it goes into the dark room where the underwriters sit. And, like the Pope, they just let out the black smoke, which is a no. And then we can't get back into So I don't know how you're making the case because they say bring comparables, but there are no comparables because this doesn't exist. So
our first scheme so we started on site with the Keel. It was the first forward-funded scheme, built-to-rent forward-funded scheme outside of London in 2014, and there were no comparables at all. It was pretty much the first built-to-rent in the north as well, and we had to make up the figures, and we woefully underfunded the scheme. I think 240 units the Keel was, and we forward funded it 28.8 million quid. We sold it a year later for 49 million pounds. And that's the money didn't come to me. But that just goes to show you that there was evidence then, because the building created evidence. And the problem with being a vanguard in terms of in the market is that you will woefully undersell your scheme, and because no one will have the confidence, I don't believe. And I think Moda is a very interesting, because we look at Moda and wonder how on earth they make things stack at that high end of the market, and they have to sell the dream, the vision, and it takes a long time to do that, and you just have to find somebody who believes in your dream and vision. And co-living in Manchester is slowly, there's very few schemes, but it's slowly happening. And how they're making it stack up is that it's private developers are funding it themselves, not forward funding it. So they're doing it themselves, getting it stabilised, and then selling the investment afterwards. So Downing are doing that, and they've obviously done a lot of students in the past. So the problem is being innovative in the market, you'd never get rewarded for it unless you've got a big hefty promote on those figures. And the market's a hell of a lot tighter than it was in 2014. So I don't have an answer.
Well, I would say, so it's an interesting point. So it depends, I think, also whether it's more on the rents or the yield, because the yield is a much tougher thing to argue, right? But on the rent, certainly, we were in a very similar position to you guys basically when we started, because there was no BTR comparables effectively. I think what you can see now is, and the point we're making about different cities is, even if there's no BTR comparables where you're actually building, there are some very good case studies of other similar cities, whether it's geographically close or at a similar stage or size, where you can actually quite easily demonstrate, look, average rents are here, upper quartiles here, the BTR, comparables are here, and actually apply those to your market, right? Even if there's no BTR comparables, you can do that. Even then, in most cities, we are now seeing there's at least one, BTR comparable. So that would be my advice, because I think demonstrating it in that way, there's plenty of cities in the UK that people thought there wasn't going to be any BTR, there now is. And actually, the rents being achieved are a similar premium to the upper quartile that you'll see everywhere else. So,
and just picking up on that, I think one interesting observation, and it happens much more in the regions, is the schemes aren't being pushed by the managers. Some of the schemes where there's one or two schemes, and it's not a dominant, they're not dominant in the market. Well, they are dominant because there are only one or two schemes. The rents just languish because no one's really driving it. They're quite happy and like, oh, our investment case is really good. What they don't realise is how much headroom there is in that market. And again, it comes back to Moda, because they really, really do push things. But I think it's having a good manager and pushing it. We could probably, on the keel, have pushed things 25% more very, very quickly, and that was proven in that investment sale, being 50%, 45% above what we funded it at. So it's people get quite complacent quickly if it meets their investment targets, I think.
great. I'm conscious, I think we had another question. Yeah.
Hi, Ed Suddy from BRE. I was wondering if, for the actual built asset, whether local vernacular architecture, materials, etc., is that an important element or not? I mean, I'm sort of blurred by general housing estates that look all the same across the country. I'm wondering if
it's a
the
good question.
BTR offer. So
from our perspective, yes. When we first sit, and I think we talked about it, as BTR generally, we're sitting there right at the start, right? Even before we bought the land, basically, and thought about what the development is. So from our perspective, absolutely. And trying to tie into what's already there. Typically, we're building, in probably brownfield sites. There's other architecture around, particularly in cities that have a long history of potentially industrial and things like that. You don't want to overdo it and be too cliched, but it's about actually working out what works with the local architecture, certainly in terms of colour schemes, materials that you want to bring into the site. I think for us that's very important, and we're trying to do it tastefully, but still have a nod to that.
Yeah, I would say we also are, we definitely are very passionate about maintaining that placemaking wherever we are. So, for example, in Edinburgh, our neighbourhood was built on top of the site of an old brewery. So there's a lot of elements of that in the way that we've put that building together. Even just the brickwork in Hove Central. There's lots of things that we'll add into our developments in order to make sure that there's a, as you said, a tasteful nod to whatever that architecture is already, but even interiors as well. And I think that that again, that's another way to respect the community and the area that we are going into. As I said before, some people sometimes see that the BTR sector as just these luxury buildings that are very high and they go into a city and everything's enclosed. It's actually the opposite of that. It shouldn't be that. And if it's that, then someone's got it wrong, because it has to be something that is organic, that helps the area to engage with it. It can't be, and we see it when we engage with communities before we even hit the ground, and we'll find what is the feeling towards what we're going to build, and we will very often alter our design based on feedback that we get or whatever that local request is. So it's a really useful tool, and it definitely does mean that you end up with a more a better appreciated building at the end of it.
Just echoing what you said there, Amanda, we've got, so Brondesbury, which is our next scheme in Willesden Green, is in quite a suburban part of London, and the building's quite unique because most of the other properties around it are quite substantial detached family homes. So we've been very keen to keep the building in keeping. There was lots of conversations around the table that we could have added quite a lot of parking on the site. Obviously it's additional ancillary income, but actually we've decided to go completely opposite. And we've put a lot of landscaping in, so we've got lots of outdoor garden areas for the residents. When you walk past, it is quite in keeping with the area that it's in. We've got water fountains and things like that for the sort of, the aesthetics. And so actually walking past, in first glance, you wouldn't actually think it was a block of apartments. But like I say, we could have made it a massive car park, but we didn't.
Always tempting, but
it is
I think that's a really interesting one of that location.
Yeah. And there was no planning constraints on that either. We could have done that, but it just wouldn't have fitted in with the surroundings.
I think that's a great example where if you were a private developer, you probably would, right? You just look at the economics, and that would make a lot more sense on your spreadsheet. But actually, in terms of owning the whole piece, then that's probably the right choice. Any other questions from around the floor? Yes.
Thank you. In terms of lease up, have you had any additional different types of challenges when you're going into a city where the rental data isn't necessarily there, but then neither is the competition? So I'm just interested to get a view of whether lease up in different cities is kind of has to be different to, say, in London or other areas.
I'd say, so I'd say yes and no, right? So we launched in Cardiff. We were the first BTR in the whole of Wales. So it was like there's no rental evidence effectively. But I think from our perspective, the approach to leasing we take is, and as I'm sure we all do, is around actually, being very much on it. It's not a question of set the rents. Maybe that's the managing agent example previously. You set the rents, and a month later you have a look at them again, and you say, are they right or not? We will alter rents quite happily on a daily, maybe an hourly basis if we see differences happening. So I think from our perspective, yes, there's some difference because if you don't have the comparables, if you don't know exactly where you're pitching the market, how much headroom is there, what's going on. But actually, I think from our perspective, we apply the same process because we're reviewing things regularly. We're looking what, is the trade-off between occupancy and rental levels, where we're trying to set the tone, what's happening. I think the only other practical difference, quite frankly, as well as legislation. So, whether actual, physical things you need to do to either be compliant, things you need to run through, whether that be in different countries or different boroughs. So that's the only other sort of practical difference, I would say.
And I think the pace of lease up in different cities, and I'm not sure if that is what you want to know, but what we've seen certainly is the stronger the brand, the more that people start to really understand. So even if you go into a city, Edinburgh was the first neighbourhood for us in Scotland. The Scottish market is still very new. BTR is still really new, and I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done in a lot of regional cities where people don't really know what it is. Where we have seen the benefit in our brand and how, we obviously we've been doing this for a while now, and people are tending to know who Moda is. That lifestyle brand becomes the driver for that lease up in the next city. So wherever we go, we see that pace increase because people know what they're getting. They already understand what Moda is. There's already a bit of a sense of, oh yeah, I get, because I've seen the Manchester one or I've seen the Liverpool one, or So I think the more the industry grows, the more people will be educated on what it is. But we always have people who want to be early adopters, always, and that's something that surprises me. It shouldn't, but it surprises me every single time that people are ready to sign up before they have any clue what the building's even going to look like. And I would never do that. Like I would do all my homework, but they're so keen to be the first, those first founding members, I feel like, of this new opportunity. And I think that does help. So definitely we're seeing that pace increase as we go along.
Well, lease up for us we've outperformed on everyone because we're middle market. And I think middle market, so we put 18 months in for our lease up in Media City and in Manchester. And we were like 6 months on one of them. And actually the problem was fitting enough stuff up the lifts and the stairs and all of that sort of thing. We probably overlet it up because of being able to drive the rents. So it was this balance between our funders wanting comfort that the buildings were full and then also getting the premium rent. So that's more management side than an area we hand over to a management company. So with the developer we hand over, but what we saw was that almost they let it up too quickly. So I think we were still learning lessons, and I said every scheme is different. Every one we do, we learn lessons. I think it'll be much more interesting on our new one in Leeds in terms of there's some very expensive 3-bed duplex top of the building, which are premium product, and I think it'll be choosing the right customers there and making sure that we get the right rents and the right proposition. So I suspect even if it takes us 12 months to let those, they'll be done for that specific reason.
Great stuff. Thanks, guys. It looks like